Surely, at this point, you've seen Imperial Yeast's amazing selection of high-quality brewing yeasts over at imperialyeast.com, but you might not be as familiar with Imperial Yeast's special order yeast bank. In addition to their tried-and-true core strain selection, Imperial Yeast has a number of ale or lager strains, Brettanomyces, Kveik, and other yeasts available for special order. If you're looking to match a yeast strain currently in production, or just looking for something new to play with in the brew house, reach out to Imperial Yeast customer service to see what they may have in store. Special order strains are subject to a 10-liter order minimum and require a 2 to 3 week propagation time, but they might just be what you're looking for your next brew. You can get more information about Imperial Yeast's special order strains by calling 503-477-5826 or emailing customerservice@imperialyeast.com. Welcome to the Brew Lab. One of the main reasons that I brew beer is to share it with others. It's incredibly rewarding to have others drink your beer and love it. And for those of us with a competitive spirit, entering into brewing competitions, putting your beer up against others and coming away with honors is a super fun way to see how your beer stacks up. I'm your host, Cade Jobin, and on today's episode of the Brew Lab, I'm back with frequent co-host Jordan Folks to talk about his approach to competitive brewing. Jordan, welcome back to the lab.
Yeah, good to be back. This is definitely one of my favorite topics, and excited to kind of talk about both the scientific aspect as well as the kind of competitive and playing the numbers game and all that stuff.
Yeah, me too. And folks, this is pretty cool. I'm excited. I don't know if this is the first time it's been announced on podcast or not, but I'll claim it. I'm excited to announce that Jordan is Oregon State Homebrewer of the Year. And that's like the entire state of Oregon, and he is the Homebrewer of the Year. So Jordan, congratulations, man.
Thanks, man. I still can't believe it.
I mean, so Jordan was actually just officially awarded the title day before yesterday from whenever we're recording this episode, and he joins just a select crowd or a select few brewers that have been crowned with an OSHBODY, so that's Oregon State Homebrewer of the Year. And given the timeliness of his award, I thought, hey, it'd be a really cool idea to do a show about competitive brewing. But since this is the Brew Lab, I wanted to give it a little bit of a scientific bent, so Jordan's going to share maybe the method and the madness with us, and talk about some of the science that he relied upon to craft award-winning beers, and how he did all of this. So I'm excited to hear about it, and thanks, Jordan, for coming on the show to talk about it.
Yeah, totally. I'm excited to talk more about how science meets art in this case.
Yeah. Well, don't forget to check out patreon.com/Brülosophy if you haven't already. For just a small monthly contribution, you get access to unpublished contributor recipes, discounts at YakimaValleyHops.com, and an invite to a monthly live Q&A session. So this month's guest, or rather this weekend's guest, is Jordan Folks. So you're listening to this show, so you know him. But if you missed it, he's Oregon State Homebrewer of the Year, and he's the Brülosophy's newest contributor. So this weekend, he's going to be answering your questions. Really, anything you want to ask him, he's going to be on to answer. But you do have to become a patron in order to do that by visiting patreon.com/Brülosophy. And Jordan, anything you want to say about the Q&A session?
Yeah, I'm excited to talk with everyone. So, lagers, IPAs, sour beer, let's get into it.
Yeah. And as you'll hear from this episode, it's kind of cool. Maybe you're going to get some questions off of this episode. But Jordan's got a wide range of experience. He's brewed a lot of different styles and a lot of different kinds of beer, and he's done really well in those. So this is going to be a great opportunity to ask those questions of a brewer that's really well-rounded and has got a lot of hardware to back up his brewing prowess. So go sign up at patreon.com/Brülosophy so you don't miss out. And also, if you're not doing this already, please leave a rating or review wherever it is that you listen to podcasts that allows you to leave a rating or a review. I really do read every review. They're super important to me because I want to make sure you're getting great content and that you're enjoying the show. So if you haven't left a review yet, please take a few minutes to do so. I really appreciate it. All right, this week's feedback is brought to you by the folks from John I. Haas, who over the last couple years have released a handful of really cool hop products like Lupamax, Incognito, and Flex, all intended intended to improve beer while reducing vegetal matter and thus increasing yields. They're excited to announce their latest 100% hop-derived product made especially for your patio, lawnmower, or beach beer, and that's Kettle Ready. Kettle Ready imparts a smooth, light, stable bitterness and kettle hop aroma to beer while offering microbiological protection during the brewing process. This new product is easy to use and has no special dosing requirements. Plus, due to its standardized high alpha acid concentration in a light, stable molecule, it gives the light stability and bitterness characteristics desired for all traditional beers, and it plays well with other Haas products, including Tetra Hop Gold, Hexa Hop Gold, and Ready Hop. For flexibility and optionality when brewing light, stable beers, learn more about Kettle Ready at johnihaas.com. That's John, the letter I, Haas.com. And you don't want to miss out on the Hop Flavorist America course, which is offered by Haas in March in Yakima, Washington. It's a 3-day course taught by Brewlab resident sensory scientist Jeff Daly, where you'll learn how to identify and describe the aromas of hops, where those aromas come from, and how to use hops effectively. So if you want more info, send Jeff an email at jeff.daily, that's Dailey, at johnihaas.com. All right, listener Hyperloaded left a review on Apple Podcasts, and they said, learn something new every day. They said, I love this show. Even though some of it is over my head, I learn something new every podcast. It's great to be able to listen to experts discuss a hobby that they're so passionate about. I appreciate all the hard work they put into their craft to help the brewing community get better at making delicious beer. Thank you. Well, thanks for the awesome review, Hyperloaded. Like I said, I read every one, and obviously this was a positive one, so I wanted to share. I'm glad you're enjoying the show, and Jordan, you're part of it too now. I mean, we've done at least 3 Applying the Science episodes, with episode 100 coming up pretty soon.
Yeah, well, I really agree with the sentiment here, because I definitely am guilty of getting lost as well in some of them. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of fun to be able to kind of unpack it a little bit and bring it down a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I want to say this out there too. Me too. Okay, like that's why I love talking to these people, because they get it so much better than I could ever hope to. My goal is just to try to make it a little bit approachable, and that you can go back and listen to these if you need to. All right, well, after this short break, we'll be back talking about brewing competitively, the method, and the madness with Jordan Folks. So we'll be right back. One of the biggest improvements to my brewing practices was the upgrade to stainless steel, and Delta Brewing Systems offers some of the lowest prices on high-quality stainless gear, like the Firm Tank, which holds 8 gallons or 30 liters of wort, comes with a domed lid to reduce the chances of a messy blow-off, and it can hold up to 4 psi of pressure. Delta Brewing Systems also has their own line of brew kettles, as well as one of the lowest-priced all-in-one electric brew systems out there, and their prices are remarkably affordable. If you're in the market for legit stainless gear that won't break the bank, you've got to check out deltabrewingsystems.com. The hallmark of a great brewer or brewery is brewing great beer. How's that for circular logic? But in all seriousness, it's really hard to get to a level where you brew really great beer. I heard a Belgian brewer recently say that screw the Reinheitsgebot, malt, water, hops, and yeast. The real 3 ingredients of brewing is experience, knowledge, and creativity. And those are the hallmarks of a great brewer. So Jordan, I'm guessing it took a little bit of all 3 of those for you to achieve the Oshbodie, Oregon State Homebrewer of the Year.
Wow, I've never heard that quote. That is a really accurate description of what it takes. I really agree, because you got to learn a lot, but you got to practice, and that's where the experience comes in. But just doing the same thing over and over and over, that's not enough. You got to have a creative spark. And for me, brewing is a really fun place to kind of stretch that.
Yeah. Well, that was Peter Buchart. So that was the former head brewmaster at New Belgium. So yeah, he's a guy that definitely has a lot of knowledge, experience, and creativity. So this episode, we're going to kind of focus on all 3 of those things, right? Jordan, obviously, we've mentioned a bunch of times, has got his Oshbodie, Homebrewer of the Year. That's an incredible achievement. And so I guess we should start there so that listeners kind of understand what it took to get an Oshbodie, and then we can kind of go into into, some of the methods, figure out like how you even brewed enough beer to compete, how you got all the points. And then in the next half of the after the break, we'll talk more about like some of the science that influenced your beers. Also, some tips and tricks for brewing some of those beers. So let's start there with the Oshbodie. So what does it take to get an Oshbodie?
Well, effectively, it's kind of like the state championship for Oregon. And it's essentially awarded to the winningest homebrewer in BJCP competitions in the state of Oregon, plus NHC. So there's a few rules that are associated with that, like every table needs to have at least one BJC certified judge. A competition can't award best of show based on a pro brewer's desire to brew the winning beer at their brewery. So it really needs to be above board in terms of BJCP rules. So provided that, all of those criteria are met effectively, and I should mention, this is all mentioned on the Oshbodie website. If you Google search Oshbodie, you'll easily find it. Basically, there's a point system assigned to winning awards. Gold is worth the most, silver's worth a little bit less than that, and bronze is worth the least. And there's also bonus points built in to kind of reward brewers that have a more wide range of styles. So ale, lager, sour, mead, cider, Belgian, I think are the 6 kind of bonus point categories, as well as the more BJCP sub-styles you can get golds in. So the more golds that you're collecting, the more bonus points you can receive, and just inherently the more points you can get. And then best of show is worth a lot. And so if you go to the website, it goes over the math, and across the 6 or 8 competitions in Oregon over a course of a year, as well as the national competition, they are tallying up points constantly. And it's this really fun kind of like homebrewers horse race that we're all a part of to kind of see who can come home at the end of the year with the state championship. And so, a lot of people would ask me, well, what beer did you win with? And it was a lot of beers. And so that's really what it takes, is brewing, interesting, creative beers consistently throughout the year, and continuing to kind of rack up points in each competition.
Yeah, so there's a couple of things here that are really key to me, especially if I'm thinking about, listening to this show and I want to understand what do I have to do if I want to win an Oshbodie. Not like I'm going to be able to do it. I'm not that good of a brewer. But one of the things is you've got to brew more than one beer, but there's a lot of different competitions, and this all happens just in one year, right? I mean, it's a 12-month period that all of these competitions happen. It's not like, you're racking up points over, 10 or 15 years or 5 years or whatever. It's all in 1 year. So you've got to cram a whole bunch of brewing into 1 year, right?
Yeah, there are some really active players in the Oregon homebrew scene that have been brewing for years and competing for years. And they started this system in 2016, I believe. So I'm only, what did we say, the 6th winner. But these guys and girls have been competing for many years. And it's this really kind of like really fun motivational force to keep you going all year, instead of just like, I'll throw in once every once in a while. And so you can see that one can quickly get consumed. And so brewing a variety of styles and brewing a lot of them is really what it's going to take to win the award, because there are so many people that are submitting so many different wonderful beers to these competitions. So maybe we can unpack that a little bit. But so clearly it gets into a little bit of strategy, right? Because if you're trying to get a lot of points across a diversity of styles, you can't just make 50 gallons of lager every month. You've got to be kind of mixing and matching, and I don't have unlimited fermenters down here. So there's a bit of a game to play, if you will.
Yeah. Well, and one of the things I wanted to ask too is like, I think you mentioned how many competitions are there that you can enter into?
In a given year, let's say 8, including NHC.
Yeah. So that's like brewers in Portland and like all through through the valley, Corvallis and Eugene and all that, like all around Oregon, right?
Yeah, I think that a lot of the home brewing competitions are kind of oriented towards Western Oregon, Bend to Portland, Eugene, Salem, but they do actually allow border town residents as well to compete that live in Washington State, because Portland is their home brewing scene, and so they want them to be able to be a part of that.
But people that live in like Vancouver across the river,
right? Yeah, but it is statewide, and anyone can compete, and they try to have drop-off locations across the state, and clubs will kind of like do a road trip and pick them all up and bring them back back to the central location. But I will admit, Portlanders, we do have a bit of a regional advantage because there are more competitions in Portland than there are in other towns.
Well, right. I mean, Portland's a lot larger than any of the other towns in Oregon, for that matter. I mean, it's a lot bigger. But so, is there like a limit on the number of entries that has to be in any competition, or like do you know how they pick the competitions that qualify you for an Oshbodhi?
Like I said earlier, basically, if you meet the BJCP criteria, and then like the best of show goes to the best beer, not the one that a brewery wants to brew or something like that, you're pretty much in. And you have to be willing to participate in the data sharing that's required for the point tallying. So, once your competition gets qualified, it definitely increases interest around the state, and people really want to make sure that they get it in, because you cannot miss a competition if you want to actually go for the state championship.
Yeah. So all right, that was going to be my next question. Well, it's a sort of a two-part question, right? One is, do you have to compete in all of the competitions? And then two, do you have to win the competitions?
I think it would be very hard to win the state title without entering every competition. Now, I think that to a certain extent, it comes down to a numbers game. And so the more great beers you can enter, the more opportunities you have to win. And so some competitions you're going to do really well, and others you're going to, have just a couple hits, but maybe some more misses. So making sure you're in the playing field to begin with is really critical. But if the beers aren't good, then none of it matters.
Yeah, and I can imagine that takes a lot of strategizing to make sure that you have beers to enter into every competition. If you're talking 6 or 8 competitions a year, I'm just thinking like off the top of my head, assuming that they're equally spaced throughout the year and not all crammed in together. You like, if you're going to brew a lager, you're going to need some time for the lager to clarify and clear and all that stuff. I mean, you can take some shortcuts and hope that it hits, but you're going to need to plan this. Or think about like a sour. If you're not doing a kettle sour that can be done quickly, that's something that's going to take some time to plan. The second half of my question, though, I don't want to leave this one, was, do you have to win the competitions in order to get Oshbodhi?
I mean, effectively, yes. But one thing that was kind of a cool record that I just learned is apparently I'm the first one to win that did not win a first place best of show all year. And so there's a few different, it's kind of like, like election day, right? Like there's different like pathways, to the White House with various electoral colleges. It's like that game, right? In the sense of one way is to just win a couple best of shows. And that might be all you need because of the sheer point value associated with that. I was scrappy. And I just kept fighting and kept getting a gold or 2 or 3 at each competition, and including NHC, walking away with 2 golds there. Collectively, that was enough to win, but it was like pretty darn close. And going into the last competition, it was mine to lose because there were so many other great brewers that were just winning so many awards that, there's a few different strategies that one could take, and, not scoring at a competition is really going to set you back.
Yeah. I mean, that was one thing that struck me, was the number of people who brewed really great beers, right? Because I mean, the competition this year was pretty intense. Like you said, it was yours to lose in that last competition, but you did have to score in that competition, which we'll talk about here in a little bit. And then the last thing I wanted to talk about, just sort of before we leave Oshbodhi, well, I guess there's 2 comments I want to make. One of them was, you mentioned NHC has a role, so I want to talk about that in a second. And then don't let me forget, because I want to sort of circle back to, a lot of states have Oshbodhis, right? They have their state homebrewer of the year. So I would encourage anybody that's out there that's doing competitions, check out what the rules are, right? And listen to this episode, get some ideas and feedback from Jordan. If you live in Oregon, hey, great, that's awesome. You can, apply everything that Jordan did, and maybe you can be a Oshbodhi next year or in a future year. But other brewers in other states, I'm sure your state has some sort of competition this way. And if it doesn't, hey, here's an opportunity to set it up. But okay, enough of that. Back to the national competition. So you said NHC plays a role in Oshbodhi.
Right. And it really is a good way to get a lot of points. And, I've been entering the national homebrew competition for years, and I've made it past the first round before, but I've never gotten a medal. And we watch every year, and we always submit us in our homebrew club. And, you only see an Oregonian or two walk away with any sort of hardware from that competition. And so the sheer number of entries that are associated with it, because the number of entries in the category is basically reflective of the number of points you get if you get gold. It's a good way to rack up a bunch of points, but that really blew me away is that I could not rest on my laurels. I kind of thought I had clinched it when I won those two golds. And sure enough, there were too many competitions left and too many great brewers racking up golds left and right regionally that I couldn't just walk away with 2 NHC golds and win the thing. I had to keep playing.
That's important too, right? So you did win. You won 2 NHC golds, National Homebrew Competition golds. What were the categories that you won those?
Belgian ale for a Trappist single and a sour beer. And that was I can't remember. It was European sour was the category.
Yeah. So that's pretty cool, right? That you're able to... I like the fact that Oshbodhi includes not just regional competitions, but also the national ones too, because it kind of expands. It's like, okay, we're not just limiting it to Oregon. I live in Oregon, so I know that Oregon has a bunch of fantastic brewers, right? But it kind of like stops people from other states going, well, Oregonians are just a bunch of shitty brewers, It's like, no. This also includes the national homebrew competition. And the national homebrew competition, I don't remember what number of entries it had this year, but it's always got thousands of entries. So it is really going up against national competition. And it's pretty cool that counts. And again, congratulations to you for 2 gold medals. I've only made it past the first round one time. So I've never even gotten close to a gold medal. So again, congratulations to you for the golds.
Well, and I think this might be the only year that they did a single round for NHC. And I can kind of go back and forth and whether that's more impressive or not, because on one hand, every single entry in my categories were on the tables and I had to beat them table after table. But on the other hand, brewing the same beer twice and winning twice is also really hard. So I don't know which one I'd prefer, but for whatever reason, the one time they did the single round, I was able to pull it off twice.
Yeah, it was actually at the awards ceremony. There was the guy, Scott. I don't remember his last name, but Scott, he got 3rd place in the Oshbodhi. He brewed that Keller beer and got a gold in Keller beer. And I was just thinking like, wow, talk about a hard style to brew in and win. But in any event, maybe IPA is harder, right? It's easy to brew a great IPA. So you have a whole bunch of IPAs out there that are really good, but man, Keller beer, a fresh beer that you're shipping, and worrying about handling and all that stuff. That's gutsy. So good for him for doing that. And good for you again, for taking out a Belgian single. That's another really tough style to brew because there's a lot of people out there that brew really good Belgian beers, that focus exclusively on Belgian beers, right? Don't brew anything else. Like some people brew lagers, some people brew IPAs, but that's pretty impressive to take a gold in that. So, all right, enough about Oshbodhi. I want to talk about some of the methods. So, like, this is, if you're looking at this sort of from a scientific perspective, we're not going to talk about necessarily the scientific experiments that influenced your beers. We'll do that in the next segment. But this is more like, what do you have to do, right? Like, how do you set everything up in order to compete at this level to be able to win a Homebrewer of the Year award? Maybe we should start with like scheduling and planning. I mean, what did you have to do in that regard?
Well, it's not overly methodical. Really, I'm just brewing beer to share with my friends. And so that's always been a guiding principle is, I think about, I brew a couple times a month and think about what would I like to brew next weekend? I haven't made an IPA in a while, and then I'll compete with that. And so no matter what style it is that I'm brewing, I just have been nerding out on this for the last decade, and some I know better than others, so I can kind of brew a lager with my eyes closed. But like the Trappist single, for whatever reason, I saw a novel yeast strain on the internet, and I was like, I'll take a stab at that. And I really had a lot of success on kind of the first shot there. So the first step is just, what would I like to brew for enjoyment to share with my friends? And then I start to kind of work that into the production schedule. So that means I can't just brew IPAs all year. I do need to at least like kind of stretch the creative element and kind of think, what would I like to drink, but what do I not already have on deck? Kind of just looking to have a diversity of stuff around the house.
I see. Interesting. And then are you just pulling off a couple of bottles of those batches, or, is everything getting bottled, everything going into kegs? What are you doing there?
Right. So I kind of already, before really going for the Oshbodhi Award, and I will admit I went for it. I definitely tried to win and have been doing so for years. I've brewed a variety of styles, and I think that kind of helps me out in this game, kind of having a natural proclivity for diversity in that regard. But I also do sour beer and Belgian beer, and I'm a big believer in bottle conditioning certain styles of beer. And so with traditional mixed ferm sours, I'm able to lay those out in the cellar for, 2 years, right? And so having bottle stock is a really good strategy, because you got 1 or 2 fresh lagers, like a fresh IPA, and then you can pull there's like 10 sour categories. So that really helped me throughout the years, is being able to really dominate the sour scene here. I think I'm one of the few people that's like really going pretty deep down that hole in Oregon homebrewers in terms of like a ton of sour stock with mixed fermentation stuff and blending and fruiting. So having some bottle conditioned beers that you can pull from, and then fresh kegs of lager and stuff that you just use a Blickman beer gun to fill 3 bottles the night before the competition entries are due, can help you get a variety of stuff available without brewing fresh tasting beer like every weekend.
Yeah, so you said 2 things there, which I hear and I take away. Having fresh bottles that you can, to just go to your cellar and pick out and then send into competitions. I mean, you don't want to have bottles of Keller beer, sitting back there and then enter in those, but you can enter into other styles, like styles that age well or do stuff. And like you said, there's a whole bunch of sour styles. So it's pretty interesting. So the beers that you brewed with in terms of like or that you competed with in terms of cellar stock, is this really something you've just been doing for like years and years, and you've just been building up this cellar collection, and every year you're just taking a few bottles off of the cellar and entering them into each competition?
Well, with the last few years trying to place an Oshbodhi, I've probably given away a lot more of the beer than I've drank, both to friends and competitions. And so the sour beers, there is a finite number of those. You might have a couple cases, and those go quick with a competition, every 6 weeks. So you kind of have to be at ease with just paying people to drink your beer all year long. And, so make sure you have a really good excuse to pop one with your friends.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point, right? I think that's something that a lot of people don't think about when they're thinking about competition brewing. You're giving away more beer than you are actually drinking. So let's say you make a fantastic IPA, or whatever, a fantastic sour, and you're like, oh my God, this is the best sour I've ever had. You're sharing it with your friends, but you're also giving it away to competitions, and pretty soon, like you said, there's a finite amount of it, and then it's gone, and there is no more of it. So you do have to kind of manage that and stay conscious of what you're going for and what you're trying to do when you're brewing beer. What about like ingredient sourcing? Was that any kind of an issue for you for this year?
I always try to match the ingredients to the style that they represent. So I use German malts and hops in German beers, and I use American hops and IPAs. And so just trying to get the ingredients that are theoretically the hallmark of the style. And then with sour beer, with fruit, every harvest season, I like to go to the farmer's market and just see what they got and try to befriend the guy, and hopefully they'll give me a bulk discount, because it's very expensive to walk away with a truckload from the farmer's market. And just, so kind of leaning on both tradition, but also just the season and seeing what's out there.
Yeah, and like you said with that Belgian beer, I mean, we'll talk about that one again in the next segment. But you mentioned that you found this strain online, and you thought, oh, hey, I'll give it a try. You brewed it, and you said, hey, this is really good, and it turns out it was really good. It won a gold medal at NHC. So that's a great example of ingredient sourcing. But you're not doing any like pre-planning, right? Or like sitting down on January 1st and going, okay, I've got to brew, 18 beers this year. And so I need, 300 pounds of Pilsner malt and, I need 100 pounds of wheat and I need, to buy yeast on this day, and this day. You're not going like that detailed into it.
It's a little more haphazard. So what I'll do is I try to keep Pilsner malt, 2-row, wheat malt, Vienna malt, Munich malt at the house in bulk. I will every once or twice a year just go online and get a smattering of, sexy hops and then a bunch of traditional European varieties. And then I was at least cultivating a yeast bank, and I would take each yeast strain for 4 or 5 rides. And so just kind of buying in bulk so that, you know what, I'm brewing IPA tomorrow, and just wake up and do it. And so kind of having the bulk ingredients on hand and not being too married to a given ingredient. Like I'd used Barca Pills last time. They had Best Malls this time. Sure. And just kind of rolling with the punches and enjoying all the variety of ingredients for what they're worth and not getting too hung up on, well, when I won, I used Barca Pills, so I got to always use that. I'm a little more, open to just using what's around and enjoying different varieties.
See, that's really interesting. I was talking the other day with somebody about like, the kind of brewer that you are, the style of brewer that you are. I'm a recipe follower. Like, that's just me. I really like to follow recipes. If they're great recipes, then I'll follow it and I'll just keep doing it exactly the same way and maybe iterate just a little bit. But it does take a little bit, like we talked about at the beginning of the shows. It's like there's some experience, knowledge, and creativity. So yeah, like you said, Barca Pills made this fantastic Pilsner or whatever, made this great German lager that you really like, but they don't have Barca Pills this time. So now you've got to do something else. Now they've got best malts. How do you know, which grain to use and when and what proportion and all that? And I guess I would say, or I'm guessing, maybe I'll ask you that question, right? How do you know what to do whenever the ingredient changes or shifts?
Well, hops are and yeast, I guess, are a little different in the regard of like really old hops, that's not going to work out well. And expired yeast, that's not going to work out well. But generally speaking, like ingredients are pretty good, right? And so I think that's part of that adaptable creative brewer is just being able to take any raw ingredient and make it into something wonderful. And so I think it's easy to get hung up on tradition, and we would never know what the next great malt is if you don't try it. And so I think that that's kind of just part of my brewing ethos is working with what I got and still trying to make the best damn beer you've ever had.
All right, so working with what you've got, in terms of ingredients and trying to make the best damn beer that you've ever had. So then is it like you just have a fantastic bank of recipes, or is it process, or like what's the secret sauce?
Well, I think that experience and knowledge and creativity, like you said, right? So I've made a good Helles last time that I've made in various iterations. I don't have Holler Tower. I have Saphir. That sounds fun. And so, being able to kind of like lean on experiences, but having enough knowledge to push the boundaries or even start from scratch, that's really where it all comes together. And there's been a lot of great resources, many of which Brülosophy has provided. So, for a totally new style, like my first Trappist single, to the internet. And Michael Tonsmeyer actually had an article about Trappist single that he had read from another article. And so I just kind of riffed on that. And, they're using some Slovenian hop. I have Tettnanger. That sounds close enough. And just kind of using a bit of knowledge, creativity, and education, I guess.
Right. Yeah. Well, and I guess there's also just a little bit of putting yourself out there too, right? Like just enter the beer and see how it does in the competition. Like you said, you're going to enter some stinkers, not like stinkers as like they're bad.
Oh,
beers.
I have.
Oh, well, okay. Yeah, fair.
I had a wheat beer that I bottle conditioned like 6 because a 6-pack wouldn't fit in the keg, and they turned in the bottle. and serving at the homebrew club, people thought it was a Brett beer. And so it was the carb tabs. And I'm thinking maybe they're just too old and the carb tabs are infected. And so, I'll enter beers that I know aren't good, but like I had a pale ale that I didn't really love, got silver. Someone might like it. And so you can't enter 100 bad beers, but occasionally one that you're not that proud of will sneak through.
Yeah, well, and I mentioned that Keller beer earlier because I spent some time talking with Scott at the award ceremony for your Oshbodie, and he said that Keller beer, he had this Kolsch that he had brewed, and he was like, this is the best Kolsch I've ever had in my life, and he entered it, and it didn't go on. I mean, maybe it did, maybe it made it, I don't remember if it medaled or whatever, but it didn't score as highly as that Keller beer did. And he just entered the Keller beer going like, oh, okay, I'll just enter the beer, right? And that ends up getting a gold medal for him. So sometimes that happens. So I think it sounds like with his experience and also with your experience, it's like just enter the damn beer, right? Right? Like compete with it. If you want to compete and you want to, do well in Oshbodies, like enter your beer. You just have to enter it.
I mean, if it's truly putrid, maybe it's a waste of the $10 and the hassle.
Sure.
But like this, wheat beer I mentioned that kind of turned, what if I entered it as a Brett beer? And there's definitely a bit of that too. And I know that podcasters have talked about that in the past with competitive brewing. If your target was pale ale, but it tastes more like an IPA, maybe that's the category it should be entered in. And so I will often have PBC members over for late night decisions where we're like kind of like thinking about it kind of more objectively and trying to make sure that we're entering it in the right style. Because some of these things kind of cross various lines. Like you can enter anything in Keller beer, that. So,
sure. Yeah.
And sometimes your international pale lager might be better in a Keller beer category, something like that.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's interesting. So like you're leaning on your relationships. You're leaning on, your homebrewing group, Portland Brewers Collective, to help you figure out where to enter a beer, right? Like what does it taste the best in? Like you tried to brew a Pilsner, but it's not hoppy enough. So it's a Helles, or like, it's just still needs a little bit more time to lager. So enter it as a Keller beer.
Well, and another important caveat to these competitions is you can't enter two Helleses. Right. Yeah. And so you can enter two beers in this same like parent category, but you can't enter two of the same substyle. And so like my dilemma is I always have too many fruited sour beers. I can't enter them all. So getting together and kind of tasting through and thinking what are our strongest entries and looking at my bottle count. If I don't have enough to send the best one to NHC and all the local competitions, maybe I'll save that for NHC and kind of thinking about the relative stakes to justify where which bottles go.
Yeah, that's interesting. And so, I mean, thinking about the stakes of the competition, right? I mean, so there is a little bit of strategy that goes into this in terms of which beers you enter into which competition.
Especially with non-fresh beers. And then, your lager's not going to last 12 months because your friends are drinking it and it's awesome. But also, it just has a shorter shelf life. So, the ones that you have a single case left, and that's all that will ever exist of that bottle conditioned Belgian or sour beer, you got to kind of think about which competitions you want to reserve it for. And then hopefully, reserve some for special occasions as well.
Yeah. Well, I mean, before we go to the break, because we're about that time, we talked about the relationships with your homebrew club, like helping you, get good advice and figuring out where you want to enter beers and all that stuff. But there's also the relationship with your spouse that you've got to manage too if you're brewing all this beer. But that's not the subject of this podcast. That's sort of between the brewer and their partner in terms of the way that they can do it. But you do have a supportive partner.
Actually, I really think that that's a good point. If not everyone can do this, they're not going to have the relationship scenario that's going to allow you to devote so much time to this. We don't have kids, and so I can't imagine pursuing this with little ones running around. And she's really supportive and understands it means a lot to me. And so if it wasn't for her, I don't think I would have been able to pull it off.
Well, all right. Well, and on that note, I think that's a great place to take a quick break. And so we will do that. And when we come back, we're going to talk about some of the things that Jordan relied upon, like some of the different scientific experiments and some tips and tricks that he's got if you want to enter competition-worthy beers. And we'll do that right after this break. We all know that designing recipes is really fun, and doing it well is so much easier with good software. We at Brülosophy recently made the switch to Brewfather, and honestly, y'all, we could not be happier. Brewfather utilizes the latest technology to bring you the most robust cloud-based recipe design software that can be accessed anywhere, on your phone, tablet, desktop, and even offline. It also works seamlessly with numerous third-party devices to make it easier to monitor every step of your brew. I know change can be difficult, but trust me when I say you need to go to brewfather.app today to try it out for yourself. That's brewfather.app.
Established in 1995, More Beer has been consistently serving the greater brewing community since the times IPA was expected to be bitter and clear, and there are reasons they've stuck around so long. In addition to their massive product selection and excellent customer service, More Beer has locations on both the west and the east coast of the United States, which translates into fast shipping times regardless of where you live. And when you spend more than $59, shipping is free. When you're in need of brewing ingredients and gear, there's no better option than morebeer.com, one of the most trusted shops on the planet.
As Jordan mentioned in the last segment, it takes more than just one really great beer to score enough points in the Osh Body competition to take home the title. So, Jordan, how many beers did you actually brew and enter into competition this year? And then second question, how many times did you brew this year?
I did not look up the number. I don't know the answer, but 2 or 3 times a month, and typically I'm just brewing one batch of beer, but I was brewing a lot of 10-gallon batches, and occasionally I would split things up and, do 2 different yeasts or dry hop one or not. And so I've played that game a little bit too, where you try to see how many unique entries can you get out of a single brew day.
Yeah, that's a good idea. That's a smart thing. We didn't talk about that in the last segment, but that's another strategy, right? Is like, how many beers can I get out of the same brew day? If I don't have to, I can brew 10 gallons of wort because and then just split it into a bunch of different fermenters, or like even take the fermented beer and split that into different things, right? Fruits things. Mixed culture pitch, for barrel aging or bottle conditioning, all that stuff. All right. So let's go through then. What we want to do in this segment is just like talk about some of these beers, maybe some specific beers that performed well for you. And then just kind of talk about some things, right? Like talk about some of the science that inspired you, any special tips, ingredients, processes, all that sort of stuff. So where do you want to start?
Well, because it's top of mind, maybe we can talk about IPA for a little bit. Really proud that I have won the American IPA category and the Oregon IPA only competition 2 years in a row now. And it was actually 2 different recipes. Last 2021 was an all mosaic beer, which I hope to bring to like a brew it yourself article sometime, because it's a really interesting hopping strategy. But this year was kind of my house IPA recipe. And it's Nelson, Citra, and Centennial in a dry kind of SoCal West Coast IPA. And if you're listening to this right now, it's actually available around the Portland market right now. In celebration of me winning this award, we did a pro-size batch at Barrel Brewery. I actually came in and helped out, and it was really fun, and kind of tweaked the recipe to their system. And so listeners in the Portland area can actually try this beer for the next week or two at the kind of the best craft beer bars around town, as well as Barrel locations.
Yeah. I actually have tried this, right? I just had it this last weekend at Bear Lake, which was where the celebration was for Jordan Joshbody. And it is a fantastic beer. I mean, it's a classic West Coast style IPA. I guess let me get my thoughts, and then then you can talk about it. Because there were 2 things that I thought that I really liked about it, that I really appreciated. And for me, if I was judging this beer, it would have scored really highly on that. It was bitter, but it wasn't enamel peeling. Right. And I think a lot of people, especially, 5-10 years ago, were like, West Coast IPA is just this bitter bomb. And it was just like, it just hurt to drink it because it's so bitter and like mouth puckering. That beer had just such nice refinement. The other thing too is I felt like the alcohol level was just on point. I don't know what the ABV was on it, but the alcohol was there. It was present, but it let the hops shine. It wasn't like some IPAs, especially West Coast IPAs, just hit you with the alcohol, and it's like, oh man, I can feel the alcohol burn and the hop burn, and so now I've just got this like super bitter, super alcoholic beer. So those were two things that I really appreciated in that IPA, and it's a fantastic IPA, if I do say so.
Well, thanks, and I'm really happy with how it turned out, and honestly, I think my homebrew version might be a little better on a good day. And I think part of it is the hop saturation. It's really hard to get the same level of hop saturation you can get at the homebrew level as you start to scale. And, I've experienced that with like the kind of the old school, really amazing hazy brewers. Once they started getting to bigger systems, it just wasn't as intense anymore, it seems. And so I think that's one thing that's really cool about homebrewing. And Scott Janish just talked about how hops don't scale like this, is that we can make some of the craziest hop saturated beers at home. So they, took my process, and I can walk through a couple of them that are able to achieve what you've described here. So when it comes to the bitterness, my strategy is 20-20-20. So I do 20 IBUs at 60 minutes of a neutral bittering hop. And that gives us a nice base layer of bitterness, but we're not starting with 60 and then adding more IBUs downstream. We're starting with that's like Hellas bitterness, right?
Yeah.
And so it gives you a backbone, but without like a sucker punch, right? Because we need room for more bitterness down the line. So then I do a mid-boil addition, like 15-20 minutes, another that is predicted to give us 20 more IBUs, 18, 22, something in that range. And that's when we start layering in the sexies. So Citra, Mosaic, Strata, you're hitting it heavy there. And I'll do like a 2-to-1 ratio of something, right? Maybe leaning in survivables. Centennial's got some survivable character. Kind of thinking about the modern science that we're learning about when to add certain hops.
Yeah, well, hold on. Let me stop you right there. I want to ask that question, right? Survivables. That's a term that I've heard a couple of times. But what are you talking about there?
So, I'm definitely not qualified to go too deep on the science, but
sure.
There are certain varieties of hops that they're finding have certain chemical attributes that are more ideal at different times in the brewing process due to their survivable content. And so, as I understand it, hop, as it's boiled, certain things are volatilized off. And others have greater concentrations of ones that survive the boil better. And Centennial, I believe, is one of the highest in terms of survivables. So you can retain more of that amazing Centennial character, perhaps at a 20-minute addition, than a hop with a low survivable content, which a lot of that would volatilize off. So they recommend saving those for like the dry hop, because part of it's just like economies of the ingredients, right? Like you keep throwing more, but you're not getting that much. So knowing which hops have a lot of the chemical attributes that work best at that time, and kind of leaning into that.
Yeah. Okay. So if I'm taking your 20-20-20 rule, which I think is a rule, or your 20-20-20 method for IPAs. I can't think of the word right now, but anyway, so 20 IBUs to start, another 20 IBUs in the middle of the boil, and then another 20 IBUs at the end of the boil, or what were we talking about there?
Yep. I think I'm the only Brülosophy contributor that actually does flame out hops.
You might be. Although I don't know, I've really enjoyed the flame out hops. Although we'll see about this new dip hopping thing, because apparently there's an experiment coming up with that one here pretty soon. But I won't give away those results.
And so the last 20 IBUs comes from the flame out edition. I don't pump I just use a spoon to recirculate and then try to rack off the tube. And that is roughly about 1 ounce per gallon at the homebrew scale at the flame out. So if you're shooting for a 5-gallon batch, 5-6 ounces at flame out. Use Brewfather, your favorite app, to adjust. I don't actually know how many IBUs I'm getting there, but according to the brewing software, it says that it's about 20. One of these competitions that I won this year, I won a Ward Labs kit or something like that to send it off. So I need to do that eventually and send it off and see what kind of IBUs I'm getting at the flame out. But yeah, so using brewing software, I do 20-20-20, and I find that it gives us a good bitterness, but not overly harsh, but really throwing a lot of tropical citrus and the other things that you're going to get from the right hop varieties like Citra, Mosaic, Nelson, etc.
Yeah, with Nelson, that one shocked me because I'm not a huge fan of Nelson. It's more like I don't know. To me, it's more like stinky onions sometimes. But that was having that beer. I mean, there's a whole bunch of hop character that comes through that, right? I mean, definitely like the citrusy notes, but there's also just what I've come to call like resinous-y hop character, right? Like just hops, and that's what I like about West Coast IPAs, especially. Because they're just not afraid of the hops. They're not trying to get fruity and juicy and orange juice and all this other stuff, which is great for hazies, right? It's fantastic. But the thing that sets apart a West Coast IPA for me is that bitterness, that hop character, and then, just sort of the nice alcohol strength there. Because I do want some alcohol in an IPA, in a West Coast IPA, but I just don't want it overwhelming. I don't want alcohol burn,
Yeah, so maybe we can talk about the alcohol strategy there. So the grist is approximately 75% pills. You could use 2-row. 20% wheat malt. I use Weyermann. And 5% Weyermann Carahel. Carapils will work too. And then at the homebrew scale, I use sugar to dry it out. I've also used enzyme, but I want this to be as dry as possible. So shooting for about 1060, 1062 OG, and taking that down to like 1006. On Barrelix system, they don't need sugar to attenuate. It just dries it out. So we did not add sugar on the Pro batch, and I think it got down to maybe 1004. And I don't remember what mash temp they used. Let's say 150. At my house, I'll go 148 or so just to dry it out as much as I can. And so that equals out to be a little over 7%. And I find that to be a really good balance for a West Coast IPA. Session IPA, it's kind of thin, and then triple IPA, it's just gross. So I find that to be like kind of a good sweet spot.
Yeah. No, that 7%, that like high 6, 6, 7, 6, 8, that's kind of where I'm targeting with 7%. I mean, with those hops, and the hop schedule, the bitterness and everything that you did in that IPA, again, fantastic. So, how did that IPA perform for you in the competitions?
Yeah, it won American IPA and the Heart of Cascadia. That's the Oregon's IPA only competition. And
which we should stop there for a second and realize, right? Like Oregon IPA only competition. I mean, Oregon is known for its IPAs. I mean, this is where hops are grown. They're grown here in Oregon and in Washington. And there is IPA everywhere. I mean, that's, for people who live in other states or in other countries, when you go to a bar in this part of the world, there's 10 taps and 8 of them are IPAs. And then there's something dark and something light, right? I mean, that's very different than most parts of the world. So people know what they're doing here whenever they brew IPAs. Just wanted to point that out.
There are very good IPA homebrewers around here. Most of these pro brewers were homebrewers not too long ago. So it's an IPA only competition, and this won gold in the American IPA category. So there's also white IPA, hazy IPA, so on and so forth. And on the best of show table, I think it got third. And I think that the winners kind of reveal how tough best of show is. Best of show was like a Cascadian Dark Ale or Black IPA and like a Red IPA or something like that. And I think that novel styles can perform really well on a best of show table, because even though I think it was, and the judges agreed, it was a fantastic West Coast IPA, people were like, oh, I remember Cascadian Dark Ale. Like, this is really rad. And so the best of show table is such a crapshoot because style bias can definitely play a role.
Sure, yeah, and it's tough, right? I mean, because best of shows just totally, like you said, style bias. I mean, there's other things that go into it, right? You're not judging it to style guidelines. You just got the judges out there that are just saying like, okay, here's the 3 beers, and this is the one that I like the most. And who knows? It could be because whatever reason. I used to say whenever I was a lawyer that sometimes you never know what's going to happen with the judge when you go in front of them. I mean, they might have eaten a spicy burrito for lunch, and that's just, you're going to have a spicy afternoon hearing. You never know what's going to happen. So same thing with best of show, and that's fun. All right, well, cool. So that's your IPA. What about another one? Let's go into another beer that you brewed that you had some success with this year.
Yeah, well, maybe we can talk about Trap a Single, one of my NHC golds. So I was browsing. I got an email, a promotional email from Bootleg Biology, that their new quarterly release or whatever was coming up. And I just clicked in and was looking at what they had, and they had some strain, Belgian strain that I think a comment was like, I think this is the Westie strain. And I've had West Veterland a couple times. That's not a beer you can casually get even in the Portland, beer bottle scene. And I was like, I would love to brew with the Westie strain. So just arbitrarily bought it and thought, I like Trappa Single. I like it in terms of the Trappa style beers. Double and triple are great, but you just want one, every once in a while. And the Trappa Single is 5-6%. So that's kind of more my vibe, a little more crushable. And so did some research, and some people are recommending using candy sugar. And it's like, cool, I've never used candy sugar. This sounds really fun. So went and got some clear candy sugar. And the first batch I made of that, actually, I did a split batch because it was that kind of competition mindset. And I thought, what could I make a Trappa Single out of a 10-gallon batch? So half was Pilsner and half was the Trappa Single. So I brewed kind of a Pilsner style recipe and kind of matched the hoppings based on this Mike Tarnsmar article that I found, and pulled the first 5 gallons, chilled it, lager yeast, etc. And then after that first 5 gallons came out, added the candy sugar to the remaining whirlpool boil, post boil, mixed that in, and then ran that off and made that into a Trappa Single. So the strategy that I have learned, and I really, really cannot recommend this enough for Belgian yeast strains, pitch cool. I pitch at like 63, 64, 65, and let that, go high Krausen with just like a little bit of foil covering a standard carboy. And then once after a few days, go ahead and put a proper bung and, airlock on it, and then start to slowly ramp up to only like 75. And this beer took forever to ferment. So you think Belgian, it's such a super crazy active fermenter, but maybe if you don't start at 80, it won't ferment as fast as the rumors might lead you to believe. But I find that kind of starting cool and going moderately warm is a really good way to coax out those esters and phenols that we want without it being just over the top and too much. So I think that restraint is really important when you are brewing Belgian beers, at least to the kind of thing I'm looking for. And it worked out well. The first one came out so good, I was like, I'm rebrewing this for NHC, because I was afraid that the bottles might not be fresh enough by the time they judged them. So that was kind of the process there.
Oh, nice. Yeah. So using some Belgian candy sugar, and then also a specific yeast. And that's pretty cool, right? I mean, think about all the different times that the yeast companies release those special seasonal strains, and a lot of times people will just go, I'm not brewing with it or whatever. But there are a lot of things out there, and this was a special seasonal one from Bootleg Biology. I mean, Imperial's got Heige out right now. I guess that's how you say it. I don't know. I
think Hugie was what I heard, but don't quote me on that.
Hugie. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. One of us hopefully gets it right, but yeah, but those are really fun, and they're fun to play with, and that's kind of cool too, right? Like again, you said in the last segment that you're not sitting down on January 1st and going, okay, here are the beers that I'm brewing this year. You just saw an interesting yeast came out, and you said, hey, I want to brew with that. You brewed with it, and it turned out really good, and then actually scored really well too in competitions.
It must have won something locally before I decided to enter it. I probably got a silver or a gold and one of the local competitions, but the NHC gold definitely is what stands out in my mind for that recipe, for sure.
Yeah. I know that was a huge points bump, I'm sure, for the Oshbody getting that NHC gold. But it's so cool. So through 2 beers, I mean, we can already see some of the science that's already, that's helping you to brew these award-winning beers, right? You talked about survivables in the first, in the IPA, talking about, managing your bitterness using the 20-20-20, and then here you've got a novel yeast strain, right? That's one that you don't necessarily normally brew with, and probably isn't widely available because it's a special release for Bootleg Biology, right? So this is really cool. And you looked at the article from Mike Tonsmeyer, talking about what's a good way to brew a Belgian single, and I love that too, that you did that split batch. How did the Pilsner turn out of that batch? And nondescript or
no, it was great. Yeah. I love lager beer for that reason. It's fairly simple and pretty forgiving as long as your fermentation is good. Little bit of hops here, a little bit of hops there, 35 IBUs or whatever it was, pitch cold, lager, tastes great.
Yeah. Well, we've probably got time for one more beer to talk about that you brewed this year. Do you have another one that you wanted to talk about that maybe was influenced by science, or that you've got some tips and processes that were unique?
Yeah. I would say they're all influenced by science. So why don't you choose? Do you want to talk about lager, or you want to talk about sour beer?
Oh man, that's a tough one. I knew you were going to make me choose with that. When you said I want you to choose, I was like, he's going to make me choose between lagers and sours. Sour.
Okay. So my sour process, it's funny. The Zymergy article is like, they had to give me a whole page because it's pretty complicated. So first things first, when it comes to sour beer, don't overthink it. 50% Pilsner malt, 50% two-row, and 50% wheat. Flaked wheat, raw wheat, doesn't matter. Maybe 1030, 1040 OG. I've done the Belgian turbid mash, definitely works. It can also be a 45-minute mash at whatever temperature you happen to strike it in at, 148, 158, it's going to work. So the big thing is just producing sour stock. So simple grist, simple boil, 3, 5 IBUs, doesn't matter. What does matter is microbes. The boutique labs are your friends when it comes to sour beer. East Coast Yeast, if they're still doing it, Bootleg Biology, Yeast Bay, you name it, they have really cool boutique cultures. Start buying them. Start keeping them separate in their own jars. And so you just make all these different 5-gallon carboys of sour stock, and you're pitching blend A into the first one, blend B into the second one, and you wait a year and you start to see how they taste. So, you can kind of like time it a little bit. Maybe I can make 5 gallons of Saison that I'm actually going to drink and enjoy. 5 is then reserved for the sour stock program. So when it comes to, fruiting harvest season, I just go to the farmer's market, grab some things that look good, and then I start to get into my fruiting and blending days. So then you have to look at the 6 or so carboys you've amassed throughout the year and start to figure out how acidic are they? Did they ferment? Is anything off? And figure out the blend. And what I've found is these boutique cultures really work. 5 IBUs, you could have beer that's less than 3 pH. And so you need a lot of fresh, dry, non-sour beer to blend for this to be palatable. And that's one of my tricks when it comes to sour beer, is I'm shooting for like 3.5 or so pH as a finished product, because 3.2, 3.1, it's gross. It's like you can't drink much of it. But at the same time, if the pH was 4.5, well, it's not even a sour beer anymore, right? And so kind of figuring that balance out. And what I've discovered is you need a lot of fresh, dry Saison, pretty much. So going into your blending day, brew 2 weeks before. Brew a Saison, brew a Trappist single, something that's going to get really dry, because you don't want a bunch of unfermentable sugars in your blender stock, because you're going to have bottle bombs down the line.
Yeah.
So line them all up, taste them all, write down some notes. There was a really good blog back in the day that kind of went over this kind of process, and you could rate the intensity of various things like funk scale, acidity scale, interesting qualitative descriptors. I'm getting peach on this and stuff like that, and starting to blend mathematically as well as to your palate. And you might find 4 parts of this, 2 parts of this, 3 parts of that. That gives me a decent pH, and I'm getting this really interesting, dare I say, strawberry note. Why don't I lean into that? Let's put strawberries in that. And so by having the stock necessary, the stock diversity, and using instruments like pH meters and hydrometers to make sure that we can get a blend that's going to like paper out, we can then go into fruiting. My recommendation for fruiting, as much as you can possibly handle. Like 50-50 blend of fruit by volume to liquid. Age that for 3 months. Final trick, terminal acid shock starter. Thick Belgian brown bottles, 4 volumes carb, 3.5, really high. if we can get a sour beer that's super highly fruited, got that, nice funk, no off flavors, and a reasonably acidic beer that's like, it's a sour beer, but it doesn't hurt to drink it and like send you to the dentist, and it's super highly carbed, it's going to be a winner.
Yeah. I like so much there, man. I was just like, I was taking notes, and I hope that listeners were too, because there's so much there, and I love sour beers. That's why I wanted to pull that out. So yeah, it sounds like a whole bunch of different things there. I'd encourage listeners to just pause for a second and then rewind and listen to that over again, because there's so many things. But one of the big takeaways for me is like having sour stock, right? Like having 5 or 6 different beers that you can blend together, sour beers that you can blend together. And that non-sour, like Saison or Belgian single, because that's where you're going to get that pH in the right range, and then you're just kind of mixing and mashing. I don't know. I have this like image of you in like a lab coat and like a beaker, like measuring out different beers and like tasting them and like seeing how it tastes. But I'm sure it's nowhere near that, right? I'm sure it's just taste this, taste that. Let's see, write it down. Take notes, and then blend it all together to sort of get whatever gestalt that it is you're looking for.
Well, it's somewhere in between, right? Because I'm trying to measure like 1 part to 2 part to 3 part in the like using like a dropper or whatever.
Yeah.
And to get the blend that works in that regard. But then when it actually comes to do the real blending, I don't have flow meters or anything. So I'm like kind of like counting the beer as it's flowing. I'm like, okay, that's about 2 gallons, pull it out. And it's like, okay, I need 1 gallon of this one. And so then it comes down to more art than science. But I think that really is it really at the core of my brewing ethos, is rolling with the punches and knowing enough to do it well, but know where there's like some wiggle room for like, it's okay if it's an IBU more, or if it's a % more of this one or whatever, because I'm confident in the process and the product to begin with.
Right. Well, and you're tasting the beer, and the beer's turning out great, right? The beer's turning out good.
Yeah, totally. Well, and except when it doesn't. And that still happens. I don't really get a lot of infected beers or anything. But occasionally, you give something a try. A lot of hops wasn't that good actually, or that yeast culture probably didn't need a 6th generation. But they typically come out good, and sometimes they come out really good.
Yeah, so it really is just marrying this whole thing of experience, knowledge, and creativity, and also taking some risk. Not knowing how the new, the new Belgian strain is going to taste whenever you pitch that into your Belgian beer. But then also, listening to your experience, knowing that when I brew a West Coast IPA and I use a 20-20-20 rule, it comes out at the right bitterness that I like to have, and that bitterness pairs well with the alcohol level. And then when you're brewing with sours, right? Knowing that, okay, I'm going to taste these beers, I'm going to have some sour stock available, I'm going to have some non-sour stock and some fruits, and then we're just going to be a little bit of a mad scientist and blend some things together. Fun. Exactly. I love that. And then, of course, having, not having any fear, right? Like to enter your beer into competitions. I mean, one thing that I want to say too is that it sounds like, even if you enter a stinker in a competition, hey, it happens, right? It doesn't matter. It sometimes things that you think are stinkers are actually going to win, and you didn't know it.
Right, and you will occasionally be surprised. But being confident in your beer, especially if you want to not theoretically throw money away, because it's not free to enter these competitions. But knowing what's good and knowing what might be good enough and someone might really enjoy, and knowing the right category to enter something, even if it's not where you necessarily thought you were starting, all of those are a really big part of playing the numbers game.
All right, Jordan. Well, if you want brewers to take away just one thing from today's episode about competitive brewing and maybe your method, what would it be?
I guess I'll say that it definitely takes a lot of hard work, and you have to really want it. And if that's not what you want, don't even worry about it. Just brew great beer that you love and share it with your friends and family. But if you're into the competitive spirit, it's really fun and exciting to hear your name called and go and bend down where they, put the medal over your neck. And it's really fun. And there's a great community surrounding it. So if you're willing to put in the work, you can really take it as far as you want.
Well, I hope that you guys that are listening to this episode have taken away something interesting from this. I know I certainly learned a lot from Jordan. And again, Jordan, congratulations on Oregon State Homebrewer of the Year.
Thanks so much. And I will say it here now. It will be the only time I win. Never again am I entering 17 beers every month into a competition.
Well, I certainly understand. And thank you for doing it. And congratulations. And Jordan, thank you again so much for joining me in the Brew Lab to share your expertise.
Thanks, Cade.
All right, well, I'll be back next week with some more brewing science, but until then, be sure to check out Brülosophy's other show, the Brülosophy Podcast, and all the other fun things we're up to over at Brülosophy.com. The Brew Lab is a production of Brülosophy, where they who drink beer think beer. Don't forget to visit Brülosophy.com to read about our weekly experiments and other brewing adventures, and listen to us talk about it on our other show, the Brülosophy Podcast. Thanks to all of our sponsors and patrons that help make this show possible. If you'd like to receive a reward for helping us do what we do, visit patreon.com/Brülosophy to see how you can do just that. Thanks so much for listening. We'll be back in the Brew Lab with another guest next week. Until then, think beer.